50? Maybe? Guessing?
I'll go with half that, maybe 25.
Moscow every minute? 10.
Probably 10 to 20.
1,000 to a million? A lot of people? Because they're getting killed every second of the day.
Moscow. The very word instills fear in the hearts of tourists and traveling businessmen throughout the West, for whom the M in Moscow stands for murder. This city has been the center of an incredible transformation. Once the heart of the evil empire, today it has the reputation of being one of the most dangerous cities on earth. Indeed, many Westerners are more afraid of today's post-Soviet Moscow than of the Moscow of the Cold War. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the argument has been that Russia is little more than a criminal state. Books such as Red Mafia and Comrade Criminal offer terrifying portraits of Russian bandits, while the English-language press was saturated with articles ratcheting up the fear factor, and TV shows convinced viewers that Russia was morphing into the greatest threat known to mankind. So how has this cultural and media portrayal of Russia as the crime center of the world affected John Q. Public?
When is your next trip to Russia?
Never.
I don't have a trip planned to Russia. I'm not quite sure I can even get in.
Never?
Wouldn't go there. Don't really have any plans to go to Russia anytime soon.
That would be the same as my first trip to Russia, and that hasn't taken place yet either.
Too scared to leave my own state, in my own country.
Regular folks aren't the only ones who are scared. International action heroes Matt Damon and Tom Cruise are among just two big-name stars who canceled trips to Moscow in recent years because they were afraid that if they came, they would never leave Russia alive. If Moscow's really such a death trap, then how, I wondered, can a visitor protect himself?
Hey, Security Investigations, may I help you?
Yes, hi. My name is Jackie Tatum. I'm the personal assistant to a rather well-known performer in the entertainment industry who's supposed to go to Moscow, Russia soon to film. Posing as the personal assistant to actor David Schwimmer, I called A-Team Security based in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and spoke with their vice president, James Durda.
Moscow, given its reputation. I've been to Moscow? No. Have I heard things on the news? Yes. Mm-hmm. That's like a hit and miss, you know. You could be there someday and get bombed or whatever and attacked, and another week you can be fine. But yeah, it could probably be dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Is this the sort of thing where you'd even want two executive protection, two bodyguards?
Yeah, 2 bodyguards. We have access to dogs and 24/7 executive protection. Dog, 2-person to guard Mr. David. And, yeah, not a problem.
Talking to the experts had me scared straight to the local bodyguard agency. Now, these guys are here protecting me. It's 3 in the morning on these dangerous Moscow streets, and without them, I'd probably be turned into human borscht. Now, I'm safe, but what about all the millions of people in this city who can't afford protection? Just then, I spotted a pair of vulnerable, bodyguardless girls wandering the streets, completely exposed. Hey, wait, girls, what are you doing here? Well, this is dangerous. I mean, you're just getting a car off the street, or...
We do this all the time. It's normal.
You guys do this all the time?
Yes,
okay, listen, hold on. I'm worried about you. I want to do this, if you let me. I want to make sure you're okay. I have bodyguards here. No, listen, I just want to make sure you girls get home okay. I'm going to follow you in this car, and when you get home, we call each other and make sure everything's okay, all right? I do. Okay, good. I'll see you soon. girls tried convincing me that in Moscow, it's totally normal for anyone to flag down a private car, essentially gypsy cabs, at any hour of the day or night. Given everything I'd been led to believe, this struck me as suicidal. Hey, so I just want to let you know I'm behind you right now. We're driving the car. I can see you. I want you to know we got your backside.
You're behind us?
The guy's not pulled a gun on you, nothing crazy? Because I'm telling you, he's dead meat. He's dead meat if he does. We're okay here.
No, he's not going to kill us, I think.
No.
He doesn't look like that.
All right. You got my number. Everything's cool. We're following you, okay?
Спасибо.
So they made it, just like they said. Where I come from, you'd have to be crazy to do that.
Bye. You're crazy.
Okay, bye. Call me. Call me when you get in. Okay.
Bye.
But still, I wondered, maybe these girls were just daredevils, blissfully unaware of the dangers around them. Or maybe Moscow's not quite as scary as they say. To check, I asked Bernie Sucher, an American investment banker who's been working in Moscow for nearly 15 years. Bernie's a well-known business pioneer here, having founded one of post-Soviet Russia's first investment banks back in 1993.
You know, it's funny because people who are coming here for the first time invariably seek out some kind of advice from someone who's already here. And so you get people calling or emailing and asking you, with a little bit of embarrassment, is it really as dangerous as I hear? And I always enjoy giving them the same answer, which I think has a real grain of truth in it, which is that the two most dangerous things for foreign business people coming over here are Russian traffic and Russian women. and I stand by that. The fact is that the kind of casual violence that people worry about, or organized violence, just doesn't exist on the street. When you're here, you're working, you're enjoying your life. You're not looking over your shoulder wondering if somebody sees a target on your back and is about to announce your fate. That's just not how we live here.
As it turns out, everyone here, from locals to foreign businessmen, are saying that Moscow streets are a lot less dangerous than, say, the streets of your average American city. But even if Moscow isn't the bloodbath horror movie that the media has made it out to be, that doesn't mean this place is as safe as Malibu. You shouldn't get carried away. After all, Moscow is the largest city in Europe. It's got a population of over 12 million people. It's actually larger than even a lot of EU states. And like a lot of big cosmopolitan cities like New York or London, Moscow is a city of extremes. You have all kinds of immigrants, legal and illegal. Moscow has the largest number of billionaires of any city, and it also has rampant poverty. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the old order went down with it. The transformation from communism to capitalism was chaotic and oftentimes brutal. Moscow's murder rate soared from 300 murders in 1985 at the start of Perestroika to 2,500 murders in 1994. That's an 8-fold increase in a single decade. Among the high-profile murders were American businessman Paul Tatum in 1996, along with parliament deputies and businessmen, both foreign and Russian. But the murders weren't random violence, the sort we in the West are used to. The murders were directly tied to business and to the redistribution of property and power under the new capitalist system.
A lot of what we saw were the working out of rules of who's going to compete, how they're going to compete, on what terms they're going to compete. And, of course, in the absence of a proper regulatory structure, or maybe even more basically, common practice, a lot of that was very messy, and sometimes it was very bloody.
So who were these new crime syndicates that rose to power? I spoke to investigative journalist Mikhail Tukmachov, who hosts a TV show in Russia that's sort of the local equivalent to America's Most Wanted.
В самом большом распространении было два вида этих гангстеров.
Generally speaking, there were two types of gangsters: former inmates and sportsmen. Why former inmates and why sportsmen? Because these two groups were already well organized and had their own hierarchies and traditions, as well as physical strength.
Команда спортсменов.
Some of these groups were usually attached to a gym or school on the basis of sports. First they protected or controlled markets, and as time passed, they became bigger and more organized. And during the 90s, the biggest organizations counted hundreds of members and spanned the entire country.
The explosion in crime wasn't all about mafias settling business scores. In the 1990s, Russia's economy collapsed by over 60%. Factories closed, workers went unpaid. Drug and alcohol abuse exploded. The future looked bleak. As society broke down, naturally violent crime rose. In Russia, no one had any illusions about how bad the 1990s were. Indeed, only the Western media portrayed Russia's transformation in sugar-coated terms, largely ignoring the pain and hardship that ordinary Russians experienced. Like this 1995 New York Times article celebrating an allegedly thriving middle class, which the author admits he observed from inside a McDonald's. The article was so outrageous that one reader angrily replied, "Most middle-class Russians are struggling to survive." Of all the many difficulties Russians faced, only one caught the Western media's attention: the Russian mafia threat. But what doesn't get reported much in the West is how much Russia, and especially Moscow, has changed since the 1990s.
I think we can characterize what's happened over the last 15 years as an evolution from really kind of like a Mad Max situation to one in a remarkably short period of time where the violence is much more implied than real. It is much more focused in a very few public cases, but still there, and where all kinds of relationships of commerce and power have unwritten rules of the game. This is not the rule of law, but we do have the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are knowable for business people. Therefore, the risks are knowable. And the rewards relative to those risks seem to most entrepreneurs and business people to be remarkably high.
Indeed, Moscow's murder rate has been declining for over 10 years now, from a high of over 2,500 murders in 1994 to less than half that in 2000. But, as Bernie pointed out, some high-profile hits still take place, such as the assassination of celebrated journalist Anna Politkovskaya. Still, Moscow's murder rate has fallen so much that today it's about average for an American city. So how is a semblance of order restored among all of this chaos and bloodshed?
Every criminal community, sooner or later, reaches a point where it grows too big for its own good. In Russia's case, criminal organizations had to divide and split because of their massive size. As a result, Russia's mafia started an internal turf war. And as it happened, they basically destroyed themselves from the inside. Some claim government involvement, but simply put, in the late 1990s, gangsters killed off their own organizations.
Let's go back over this again. A chaotic decade in which mafia guys had shootouts on the streets, and where authority was helpless until finally they managed to bring him down? Sounds kind of familiar. You know, as in Al Scarface Capone's Chicago of the 20s and 30s familiar. Everyone remembers America's crime bosses from this era. in part because they were so powerful and controlled so much, and also in part because they became Hollywood icons who are still popular today. In Russia, too, the violent crime lords of the 90s became pop culture heroes in such hit shows as Brigada. And Russian television was packed with true crime shows like Dorožny Patrol and Petrovka 38. Indeed, there are more similarities between Russia's crime culture and America's than most Westerners know or may want to know. For example, the murder rate. When it comes to danger zones, which American city compares to Moscow? Maybe New Orleans, you think? Not even close. With a rate of 56 murders per 100,000, New Orleans makes Moscow look like Disneyland. Okay, how about some place like Milwaukee, the beer capital? At 42.1 murders per 100,000, it's actually about 3 times Moscow's rate. What about Washington, D.C., the nation's capital? Again, not even in the same league. Even in a nice middle American city like Denver, Colorado, you got a better chance of getting killed. In fact, Moscow's murder rate at 13.7 per 100,000 places it between Phoenix, Arizona and Indianapolis, Indiana. If that's the case, then why are Westerners so doggone scared of visiting Moscow?
While visiting Moscow, how would you protect yourself?
That's a good question. I guess I'd have to carry me a gun. Might have to grab a bulletproof vest or something out here out there.
Have me a gun, have me some kind of ammunition so I don't get killed.
Isn't that a little irrational? You know, sort of like Europeans afraid of coming to America? In 1993, after a few European tourists were killed in Florida, hysteria swept both sides of the Atlantic. Europeans believed that America was as dangerous as Somalia. Of course, there was some basis for the fear. Murder rates in the U.S. are much higher than Europe's.
I got it!
I called Michael Fomento, a journalist who covered the hysteria over murdered tourists in the U.S. He still laughs about how ridiculous the European media reports were.
Were horrific. One British tabloid headline was gunned down like animals, shot like a dog, slaughter in the sunshine. They simply invented figures that would try to track these things down, and in some cases they were simply using figures for a completely wrong purpose, and in other cases the figures were simply made up. Things were fabricated, they were taken out of context. Each and every case, of course, made world headlines after, I think the first case or so, such that when a tourist in Florida was stabbed shot in the arm, it made international news. When a tourist in Oregon was murdered, nobody wrote about it. And today, very few people remember that this ever occurred. I'm surprised you did.
Hype or not, the murders of the German tourists led America's rental car companies to remove their logos from their cars in order to conceal the fact that their tourist drivers were easy prey. In other words, in America, tourists have to hide the fact that they're tourists if they don't want to get killed. If you're a foreigner, it'd make you kind of nervous, but in America, we don't even think about it much. But this is how myths and hype work. For example, did you know most adoptive parents from America beat their adopted children to death? No? Well, that's because you haven't been watching Russian TV lately. The deaths by abuse of a dozen Russian children adopted over the past decade by American parents have been given wide coverage on Russian TV. So much so that the Russian parliament is considering banning Americans from adopting their children. Yet if you told Americans that they have a reputation for murdering foreign babies, they'd think you're nuts. If that myth seems bizarre, then consider this surprising fact. Moscow's murder rate is almost the same as Helsinki's. That's right, the capital of Finland, you know, those hot-blooded Finns, the terror of the North, has a rate of 12.4 murders per 100,000, just 1 murder less than Moscow's. One reason could be because Finland's gun ownership rate is one of the world's highest, second only to America's. According to one report, half of all Finnish households are equipped with a firearm. If I were one of Santa's reindeer, I'd seriously consider packing up and moving somewhere a little safer. Buying guns and ammo is incredibly convenient in America. When I was a kid and I used to go duck hunting with my stepfather, on the way out to Susanville, we'd stop into a store. He'd get himself some beer, I'd get the bullets, maybe a box of ho-hos, and then we'd go bag ourselves some ducks. How about here in Russia? Is it as easy to buy a gun as it is back at home? In Moscow, you could find specialized gun shops pretty much anywhere. I popped into one near the center of town. Здравствуйте. There's some beautiful guns here. Очень красивые. Вот какой мощность, калибр вот эти оружия здесь?
Ну, здесь идет весь 12 калибр, как бы.
So they're all 12 caliber, for the most part, shotguns. Можно вот пробовать это?
Слушай, только при наличии лицензии.
Лицензия?
Да, на покупку гладкоствольного оружия.
So I need a license in order to buy one of these shotguns here. А можно просто держать или...
Только при наличии лицензии. Когда лицензия у нас, мы можем вам дать в руки.
So even just to hold a gun, you need a license here. This is like liberal hell. For gun lovers, it gets worse. All these pistols you see on display in the store aren't the kinds of bone-splattering gats we in the States are used to buying. They're all gas pistols, basically pellet guns. That's because real handguns are illegal in Russia. Only hunting guns are allowed. So the way it works in Russia is, if you want to treat yourself to a pump-action 12-gauge, you need a gun license first. And to get that license, you have to pass a psychological exam. To find out how easy or hard it would be to pass this test, I visited a psychiatrist, Dr. Marina Ivanova, at a private clinic in downtown Moscow. Здравствуйте. Я здесь, потому что я хочу разрешение. I want a license for a gun.
Лицензию. Ну, меня, конечно, будет интересовать.
Well, I want to know if you have any bouts of aggression. If maybe you have some sort of childhood psychological trauma that could cause you to be more aggressive today and affect your reasoning for wanting a gun.
And if a person is bipolar and he's got a regular doctor's prescription for antidepressants?
No, these people are not recommended.
Because in the States, half of all people are on Prozac or some other antidepressant.
No, of course not.
Okay, if I said, look, this is my right, it's in the Constitution, it's a question of human rights, and I object to you even asking me why I want a gun.
Well, this aggressive approach already brings this person under serious doubt.
So I'd have a problem getting a gun license.
Yes, definitely.
Americans think it's their constitutional and God-given right to own a gun. But here in Russia, that kind of thinking is considered crazy and a reason alone to deny you a gun license. Making it a little bit harder for your average bipolar sociopath to stock up on weapons may be one reason why Moscow's murder rate is so much lower than what most people in the West would have expected. So why does the myth persist? Bernie offered his own explanation.
From my point of view as a businessman, I have a competitive advantage because I'm on the other side of that wall of ignorance and fear. And that means that I have a longer period of time to make money here and to build businesses while people who perhaps could do a perfectly good job of competing with me stay away.
So it's good for you to keep that myth going. So as it turns out, Moscow is not Dodge-ski City, the terrifying, guns-a-blazing death trap that the media has made it out to be. And if you're still clinging to that myth, then you gotta ask yourself, are you just being fooled? So if you come to Moscow as a tourist or as a businessman, The reality is you don't need any more protection here than if, say, you were going to go golfing in Phoenix. And that's good news, because that means you can save yourself a lot of unnecessary sleepless nights and unnecessary expenses. Guys, sorry to break the news, but I'm going to have to let you go. Thank you very much. Thank you. Disabusing yourself of a bad myth not only makes you a little bit smarter and a little bit richer, but it also has other benefits as well. Natasha, hey, this is Mark. Yeah, you remember we met last night? Yeah, listen, I'd like to meet you for dinner without the bodyguards. Yeah, guess what? I'm also taking a gypsy cab. Pretty macho, huh? So you meet me? Great, I'll see you soon.